a 10 because the
Shield's new base of operations. We've reached out to our best operatives, so you'll find plenty of familiar faces here. Get yourselves acquainted and meet me in my office.
The 1-point game against Detroit he had last night. I will give him a 3.
like 5.
Detroit, the worst team in the Eastern Conference. We're not talking about that. We're talking about go. We're talking about go. Skip.
Didn't Detroit get...
Who mean well will always say, "Oh, Tony,
Did they say they were
things will be
sending
different if
someone
just
down
such
to
and
look?
such and such and such."
That was
Just remember,
yesterday.
Tony, nobody in the world, no human being on the planet
Odin, sir!
is immune from disappointing you and letting you down. You're gonna find that out as you become older and wiser. But you know what you do when you're old and wise, Brian Last?
No. What do you do?
You get up in the morning and you have a good, quality, healthy breakfast to start off the day.
It's good to see you in person.
Oh,
We'll be working
boy.
more directly moving
So
forward.
this past week,
Hologram calls can only do so much.
AEW
What I'm about to
was
say
in
may sound
Long
absurd,
Island,
but
New
Dr.
York.
Kim assured me it's a
and
real
this was
threat.
December the 8th, folks.
We've encountered
the Wednesday
time
night that we
disruptions
get to
across
stay
the
up
world.
late.
Tachyon storms, as we call it.
And
We'll need an
again,
experienced,
this started
hard-hitting
off
task force
like
to investigate these sites. You are the
Classic
perfect
wrestling
candidate.
program
Our agents
from
will
the
provide
days when
mission
people
support
used to
whenever
watch this
possible.
stuff.
Agent
And
Morales
after
volunteered
the
to
first
track
30
these
minutes,
Tachyon
I'm
students.
thinking they're gonna do
Report
it
to her
again.
and we can
Long
get started.
Island, New York City, they're bringing out the big guns. Oh God, that rest of that show fell in a toilet faster than a turd out of a guy's ass when he's just drunk a gallon of castor oil. Straight down.
Encrypted.
But we started off hot. We started off. We're in
Welcome
Long
back,
Island.
Avenger.
We got Sockface on play-by-play. We got twin color guys, Tony Schiavone and Taz. I don't mean they're twins.
Good to
I
see
mean
you
there's
again.
two color guys.
Glad we could work
Taz is a
together.
Long Island guy.
Tachyon
Taz
storms
is
are
a Long
sweeping
Island
across the
guy.
world, more frequent
Got a
by
lot
the
of
day.
hometown
We
flavor
don't
here
know
tonight.
what's
Here comes
causing them
MJF's
all,
music.
but we need answers, Stat.
And the
We
people are
believe
up
they're
'cause it's the
related to the
hometown
disruptions
boy.
we've been experiencing
And then
here,
out walks
like a hiccup in
CM
time
Punk.
or intense deja
Black
vu.
Punk is
I've identified a
healing!
site that's producing near
On
constant
Long
Tachyon
Island
emissions.
Sound.
Seems like the perfect starting point.
Long Island Sound.
He
There's
threw
nowhere near
them
Long
in the
Island
water
Sound.
and they drowned. So Punk is it's Bret Hart in the United States or Canada all over again. It's the dueling hometowns. Is it Tennessee versus
whatever you
Texas?
need.
No, it's
Yes,
Chicago
you're mad.
versus Long Island. The rivalry that we didn't know we needed until right now. And Punk comes out in this environment, in this atmosphere, to a cacophony of boos. Because he's been fucking with the hometown boy. There were some Punk chants, yes, obviously. But he gets in the ring and you can tell he's having a ball. Because this is perfect for what he does. All of Punk's promos are so based in reality, so peppered with comments, so conversational and then declarative. It's natural, and he didn't have to change his attitude or his personality or even his material. Because when somebody is a smart ass to him, he has no problem being a smart ass back. Maybe it was one of the things I like about him. So you expect him when he's getting booed, the whole bit of the promo, oh, so this is your boy. This is the guy you're going to support. The guy that did this to me and that to me and the other. Okay, if that's the guy, okay.
Come back
That's all
whenever
need.
you
I mean,
like.
It was brilliant. And I mean, the little things. He said, oh, Chicago was so much louder. And he just ripped the Islanders to shreds. You're closer than I am, and I don't follow the hockey, Brian, but they pretty much, I guess, have to suck from what he was alluding to, don't they?
They were once the very best. They were once the pride of Long Island. There was once a drive for 5, and they have been pretty much garbage ever since.
And now just 4 on the floor.
But hey, now we got a building that won't be going away, so I think the Islanders, I say we like I'm part of the team, I think the Islanders have a bright future for the first time in a very long time.
Well, but not after this promo, they didn't, because now everybody thinks they fucking suck. He took off his jacket, and he's got the 4 pillars of AEW shirt, but MJF is replaced with Britt Baker. And, again, you know, MJF, he drew the comparison to Dennis Rodman when he finally started playing for Chicago. He said, MJF is your worm. This worked. This worked, and nobody had to do anything out of character or say anything that it didn't sound like they would say in real life. And that's why it was brilliant. And when he said he's
Hill
got
here.
his eyes on
We found a
next
facility
week's
where AIM is preparing to
Cage and
spin up
Bryan
another
Danielson
fake arc
title match,
reactor.
of course, 'cause he's
We all know
CM
how
Punk.
well
He's
that
a
went
big
last
star.
time.
He should be looking to see who's going to
The
win
arc
the world
reactor's
title
nearby.
match. But
Jarvis,
this
are you
segues
picking
right
up
there,
anything?
but MJF
Locked
and I've
on
got
and ready,
something going on.
Commander
We
Hill.
need to
Good
get
luck
that
out there.
settled first. Prioritize your involvement. And then, you know, I mean, the last, his dog Larry, he said Larry has more balls than MJF, and he's neutered. Don't run like folks in Long Island. MJF stand and fight like
An
they
elite
do in
AIM
Chicago.
team is
And
close
finally
by and on
finishes
alert.
up with, now that he's worked
Updating your
himself
HUD.
up, and I can identify with this too, after he's talked about all the things MJF has done to him and done in general, the spineless, weak-willed chicken shit that he is. Then finally Punk works himself up and says, okay, this is your guy. Well, if that's who you back, then you're all chicken shit. Then leaves the ring. Brilliant. There has not been a segment of wrestling television on anything the WWE has produced that has been as good as the Punk segments and a few of these others that we have praised to the heavens, because it looks like it belongs on a wrestling show and somebody can script it and lay it out and somebody needs something. That's what they need. That's why the WWE's boring and losing all their viewers, because they're so contrived and choreographed and manipulated and orchestrated and produced and overwritten and lacking any kind of passion and legitimacy, and then a guy comes out with a microphone like this and blows them all away. They ought to be ashamed of themselves, I say. That's what they ought to be looking for in this segment.
Really good. I think maybe a tad too long. I didn't make any criticism of it.
Well, if it had been maybe the last couple of shows, I might agree with you, but on this show, I could have taken another hour and 40 minutes. Go ahead.
I didn't know what was coming. That's a good point. It was an interesting dynamic, and it was what I expected. Of course, CM Punk's the biggest star in AEW right now. I would argue maybe the whole business. Roman's not going to fool him. He's a babyface just by being himself.
Right.
But he took it and he ran with it, and you know, someone like Cody should look at someone like CM Punk and how he handled this. And they're like, there's a way to get these things done, and you look at the look in his face, he had everything under control. This is really good, man. The thing I like the most is they're keeping these two away from each other. They're promoing even at each other, but each week there's another escalation in this feud, and nothing is done. It's not like week one promo, week 3 car accident, week 4 he's back. Like, there's not that. It's been laid out fairly coherently. And like you said, the Punk segments have been the best. Punk at Kingston was fantastic. The Punk and MJF stuff has been really good. Punk and Darby was good. This is not one of the parts of the show that's a problem at all.
Well, and we're getting to those, but we still had some good stuff. Kind of. If they played a video. arrived in a sports car, a fancy sports car of some description. Obviously expensive, with an NFL-style voiceover guy putting him over. And he's on. And first he gets out of the car, he puts his high school football jacket on. Where was it? Plainview? Maybe Haddonfield. He should be from Haddonfield High. Then they could bring Michael Myers into a cross promotion. Anyway, so he's on the high school football field, wearing his football jacket. The NFL voiceover guy is listing all of his accolades. If he was Lex Luger, they'd be allocades. And it was hilarious and seriously good at the same time. It was obviously meant to be funny and entertaining, but it was slanted toward how the heel would truly present himself, and the comedy came in the fact that this guy is such an insufferable egomaniac, and not because he's jerking everybody's chain trying to get everybody to laugh at him. It was a good personality piece. And then in the arena, they play his music and he makes his entrance. If you notice, every wise-ass white guy between 16 and 30 in the building just loved him to fucking death. So we've established MJF's core audience is a bunch of fucking guys from New York like him that like wise-ass. I can see that. But here's the problem. He was coming to the ring to compete in another one of these goddamn Diamond Battle Royals. And you can get back to battle royals in this company, and too many battle royals, probably at wrestling generally. That's the only one that got an entrance. And then they started the match, everybody just jumped in. Did I miss it, or did the announcers ever even run over everybody's name? Because I was trying to write the names down as I was looking, said, who's that?
I don't think there's...
So 12 guys, MJF gets in the ring, 11 other guys jump in, and from my accounting, it was Jay Lethal, Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Lee Moriarty, Matt Hardy. Talk about a spare prick at the wedding. It was completely out of place. Dante Martin, Leo Rush, Wardlow, and Kazarian. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I missed 2.
Spears was on the floor, but he wasn't in the match, right?
He wasn't in the match. But anyway, nevertheless, it's a fucking battle royal. It was a showcase for MJF, but here's where they made the mistake. They put Jay Lethal in this thing. Come on, seriously. He just debuted, lost his debut match. Now you stick him in a battle royal, and the way that Lethal got eliminated was Matt Hardy got brass knucks from one of his stooges, hit Jay Lethal with the brass knucks, and then just grabbed him and dumped him over the rope like a sack of shit. Should have been the other way around. Jay Lethal should have eliminated somebody like Matt Hardy, sweetheart, to at least show that he's capable of doing something. Better yet, he should have been in this. Hobbs and Wardlow gave each other some tackles, and then suddenly Leo Rush came from behind Hobbs and drop kicked or whatever. No, he had gone over the top, but he was on the apron, and Rush came with a drop. So Leo Rush eliminated Powerhouse Hobbs. The showcase for MJF in this was that he hid behind Wardlow most of the time, and he jumped out once and took a cheap shot on one of the baby faces that had his back turned and it brought the house down. And then he'd hide behind Wardlow again. Until finally, Leo Rush and old Shoddy Lee Johnson, he was in there too, old Shoddy Lee. They both tried to dump Wardlow, and MJF came from behind and dumped all of them, including Wardlow. So that meant that Starks and Dante Martin were left with MJF, and the last 2 guys in the ring fight next week for the Diamond. And so Dante suddenly dumps Starks and then rips off his Team Taz armband. So that means that Dante signed the contract with Team Taz 2 weeks ago.
No, was it 2 weeks ago or last week?
It was 2 weeks ago. And they did an interview about it last week, I'm pretty sure. And now he turns on his Team Taz mate Team Taz Tazmate. Team Taz Tazmate. Or maybe they could be Tazmates.
Tazmates, I like that. I like it.
And ripped the armband off, but the camera missed the shot of him ripping the armband off, and we saw it laying on the ground. And so now Dante is going to face MJF next week, and Dante's now he's a babyface again. So MJF offers Dante the handshake, raises his hand, and leaves the ring. And then Starks gets on Dante, and MJF is conflicted. He's looking back. Should he help? Should he not? He's turning back. But yes, he runs to the ring, jumps in, shoves Starks. Starks shoves MJF, and then they both get on Dante. And then here comes Punk out, and MJF bails, and Punk traps Starks in there and hits the GTS on Starks. And that was great stuff at the end. But I'm just, the Battle Royal, lethal in there for no reason. Hobbs getting eliminated by Leo Rush, and then finally, Dante being in Team Taz for 2 weeks and never actually doing anything to benefit Team Taz, or Team Taz has never done anything to Dante's detriment, but he just decided with that same sullen look on his face, I don't want to do this. What did this all mean? I said I was going to ask you about it beforehand, but I just went through it.
The Dante Team Taz stuff makes no sense. They set up that Leo Rush. Let's go back. We started seeing Leo Rush vignettes that he's coming in as LB out. He's now a businessman. He comes in, he tries to sign Dante Martin. Dante's teaming up with Matt Sydal. Somehow everyone's getting along, but they still have a match. Matt Sydal and Lee Moriarty, I think, against Leo and Dante, and then they win, so it's just Leo and Dante, and Matt Sydal disappears. Then Taz shows an interest, signs him, and then they confront Leo Rush last week, I think it was in a promo, and now, the first time we've seen him actually wrestle as a member of Team Taz, he immediately threw off the armband and turned babyface again.
That pretty much summed it up. And again, anything that's a vehicle for MJF to get heat and get over it, etc., I'm fine with. And this obviously didn't suck and got the point across, but to waste Jay Lethal, to make Hobbs look that vulnerable, and especially to the whole Team Taz thing with Dante just meant nothing. I was quite confused. Almost like I'd gone out of my mind. Ever loving crazy. Absolutely nuts, Brian.
Nuts? Nuts are my favorite. I love nuts because I get them all the time from nuts.com.
I love nuts. I've had a couple I've kept with me my entire life. I like to have them around. But folks, I'll tell you what, if you like the nuts, well, then you need to go to nuts.com.
You like the nuts?
If you like all the varieties of nuts, we're talking about nuts of all kinds. We're talking about dried nuts, roasted nuts, candied nuts, chocolate-covered nuts. I guess they probably got pickled nuts. I don't know what the heck they've got.
They're all delicious nuts.
They're all delicious nuts. Deliciousness. The deliciousness of their delicious nuts is not just for nut lovers. It's the best-kept secret of savvy snackers across America. And now new customers get 10% off their nuts. Folks, whether it's the candies, the dried fruits, the pantry items, baking mixes, pasta, nuts.com has over 4,000 products to choose from. At the top of the list, the white chocolate toffee cashews. Of course, Brian, your family, like the chocolate lovers that they are, like the chocolate gummy bears. They have salted, roasted, organic, raw, and candied nuts. Unbelievable quality, fast delivery. If you order a box from nuts.com, it will arrive 3 hours before you order it. That's how fast their delivery is.
Let me stop you. They don't guarantee that, although I will say for the record, that is what happened. They delivered me a package a day before they said they were going to ship it.
That's right. Because what they do is they follow the Hulk Hogan route, and when they ship you your nuts, they fly it around the world through Japan to beat the international date line. They go the extra mile at nuts.com for you, folks. Yeah, they just go the other way, just turn left instead of turning right. And once they go around Japan, they've gained a day. Folks, anyway, if you'd like the 10% off your first order if you're a new customer, and if you're a new customer, then you just got to get everything and try it out. If you're an old customer, you already know what you like. Get more of that. But new customers, new nuts, as they say, get 10% off their first order when they text EXPERIENCE to 64,000. That's experience. That's a word. It's a common word in the English language, something you find around the house. Text EXPERIENCE to 64,000. Get 10% off your first order from nuts.com. Terms apply. Available at nuts.com/terms. Who reads those?
Who reads the terms?
Yes.
The
Has anybody
attorneys.
read the terms?
Yeah, the attorneys read the terms.
Term readers. Terms of the attorneys. You love nuts.com.
And I love attorneys.
Yes. And I love nutty attorneys. So that's why Stephen P. News are all of our favorites.
Oh, no, he's not.
Anyway.
Jim, you before we started recording today about Smoky Mountain and ECW, and I'm curious what
Yes,
you
I did.
want to talk about there.
Well, I was telling you that if we got stuck for a question, but this was a very interesting question that I got an email on, and I printed it out, and we bumped it from the program a week or so ago because we had other things going on, and now I can't find the email, but I will paraphrase the question because it was easy to remember. And basically, it boiled down to the person who wrote the email said, Jim, every time that someone wants to discredit your opinion on wrestling or illustrate in some way that you don't know what you're talking about, they point out that Smoky Mountain Wrestling went out of business. By that same standard, would then it also be said that Paul Heyman knows absolutely nothing about wrestling and whose opinion should be discredited because ECW went out of business? And that was a very interesting way of wording that. And I got to thinking because I've several years ago, it's been a long time since I said this, but so for the new listeners, I figured up one time that I could have run Smoky Mountain Wrestling the exact same amount of time, the exact same people, the exact same way, the exact same shows, television programs, etc., and only made one change in 4 years. If I had never charged a penny for anybody to come in and see the shows, never sold a sponsorship, or never taken in $1, I still would not have lost as much money as Paul Heyman did running ECW. So, in the category of failed businesses, Brian, is it not fair to say that I scored higher because I didn't lose nearly as much money as Heyman did? Or is that how we grade things? I mean, we'll talk about this more seriously, but that's the gist of the conversation. How come I get, if you want to go by that standard, then almost nobody except Vince McMahon in the wrestling business ever knew what they were doing because everybody at one time or another went out of business.
Well, a couple of things briefly before we go further into this. One, when ECW went out of business, one of the big differences too is its wrestlers went into debt. Chris Candido, Tommy Dreamer, various wrestlers, they were putting up money for the company and they never got that money back.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just like the company lost money, they went out of business. The wrestlers who worked there went into debt over ECW. But what I was going to say is, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the other big differences that people sometimes miss, ECW went out of business because there were no other options for it. They lost their TV, they weren't getting more TV, there just wasn't money like I said, the wrestlers were putting up money for the company. It was as dead as you could be, even though they had some good talent. Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I won't even say went out of business, was shut down by you. You could have continued. You got to the point where you said, we're not where I thought we would be at this point. I don't know what the future will be. I don't want to continue on this path. You chose to shut it down. You could have kept going. That was your decision.
Yes, well, because we got to a situation where I saw us owing people more money in the future than we did right then, especially the wrestlers. And I knew that we were at a point that I could pay everybody off eventually at that point. But going further, it was going to get increasingly out of reach. And because the timing of the situation happening between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had, at Thanksgiving weekend, we had no serious revenue coming in until Christmas weekend. So it would have been a month, which would have meant that not only would I have had to put my own money in paying for the TV stations that we paid for to air the programs leading up to Christmas Chaos, in order to get the revenue from the Christmas weekend shows that were traditionally big, but that also on some of the spot shows coming up, I'd have to ask the guys to probably take, half their money or whatever the fuck, or blah, 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 start making a bunch of deals to get to Christmas, and then let's see. It was looking better before we did Thanksgiving, but as I've mentioned, that Thanksgiving weekend that led to me make the decision that weekend was our gross from 1994, the year before, was like, over the weekend, was like down $10,000 or $12,000. And, well, if that's the case, then is Christmas going to be the same thing? And if that's the case, then I'm going to be further in the hole, and then we've got January, February, March was traditionally a strong time, but not early in January, just the way our schedule was going. And I know people are starting to get freaked out, go, what do you mean, $10,000 over the weekend? Well, that's nothing, because they're thinking about modern wrestling economics. But that's what I want to talk a little bit about in this discussion, because they don't understand not only what the wrestling economics of the entire business were 25 years ago, but also the differences in what I was trying to do and what Paul was trying to do. But we can hit the high point. I hit the high point by saying I could have run the whole company and not lost the money that Paul did. When Smoky Mountain, when ECW closed down, they were in bankruptcy. It went to court. What was the figure? You know these things better than I do in modern history of that era, but $8 million?
I forget the figure. I don't even want to say that sounds right because I'm not sure off the top of my head.
It sounds about right, but point is, it went to court, bankruptcy. The people had claims on things and liens on things, and who was going to get the video library, and Vince went into, I wish we'd actually done some research on this now, but Vince went in and made the purchase in bankruptcy court, right? For the video catalog. But it wasn't even the actual complete video catalog, because Paulie had sold some of that to Feinstein, some of the house show videos they did. And the point is, you will agree everything was a mess, and there were multiple creditors, not just wrestlers, but also various production companies and people that filed documents with the court to get their money.
I would agree. I think anyone who has ever paid attention to this, anyone who's a fan of you and Paul Heyman will recognize Paul Heyman's not a businessman. And what I mean is, you were trying to run a business, a legitimate business, and you got to your wit's end because you didn't see how things were going to improve quickly. Paul was more of, do anything you have to do today to get to tomorrow. And
I like the way you phrased that.
And I think that's why ECW ended up in the position at the end that it did, because everything was, let's just get through today, we'll do this all today, and let's work on tomorrow. And that's how ECW ended up in debt and all these deals, like you said, the video catalog was a mess. Wrestlers went broke. It was a disaster.
Well, but anyway, I will contradict something you just said. I'm going to tell you right now, I wasn't a good businessman. I was a shitty businessman too, but I was a shitty businessman in a different way and for a different reason than Paul's. We've both always been shitty businessmen.
You were more responsible.
Well, then, I will not argue with that. But the point is, in contrast, what we did was, everybody knows that Rick Rubin was our financial backer. And the conversations that we had bemoaning the state of wrestling at the time, we led to trying to resurrect a traditional territory. But the money, nobody else ever had any money invested in Smoky Mountain Wrestling except for Rick Rubin and me. I'm not saying the sponsors didn't buy sponsorships or whatever the fuck, but I'm talking about investing money in the business. Nobody's money was ever in the business except Rick Rubin and me. And basically, as I've told a story before, when we would be short or something unexpected would happen and what we got from Rick didn't stretch, that's when mine went in. And for quite a while there, I was working for the WWF to be able to afford to run Smoky Mountain Wrestling. But as far as there was no bankruptcy, there was no court proceedings because Rick didn't want the money that he put into Smoky Mountain Wrestling back. That was not the deal. I'm not saying he wouldn't have liked to have had it, but he didn't demand his money back. And with his net worth, even at that time, it would have been the same as if a guy worth $1 million over the course of 4 years invested 40 or 50 grand in something that he was interested in, right? He wanted it to do well. Part of the reason why we were running on a shoestring is because he said, here's what we're going to do, spend as little money as possible. That was from the start. So I would figure out how we could do things as cheaply and inexpensively as possible, and so did Sandy Scott, which is, once again, reason why none of this ended up in court. We ran for 4 years. But when we closed down, there was a difference, as you said, in what talent was owed. And also, I'm not saying Rob Van Dam wasn't, I think he went right to, or already had gone to the WWF at that point. He wasn't like hurting financially, but didn't Paul owe him $100 and something thousand? Just Rob Van Dam. I believe he was the big one because he was signing these guys to six-figure contracts.
But he had to. It's important to note, at a certain point, ECW had no choice because WCW and eventually WWE were signing up everybody. If Paul wanted to hang on to any talent, it's kind of like what happened in the 80s. He had to sign them to these big contracts, whether or not he could pay them or not. He had to do it.
And that's what I was going to bring up, and guys were signing them. And Paul's obvious talents have always been as a performer and a manager and a booker. He gets the best out of, what he's got to work with, and he's very creative and everything. But his biggest talent is a motivational speaker. How he was able to convince these guys that he was going to honor six-figure contracts. They were smoking the hopium, as Joe Koff would say. They were in the category of, as we just talked about, the AEW fans who just didn't want to sit. They wanted to believe it. I mean, when me and Bobby and Stan signed the contracts with Crockett for $225 grand a year apiece, we went out in the parking lot, I've said this, and said, he can't pay this. But we've got something on paper, so we're going to get something, and we were already making over 100 grand a year. But those guys in ECW, they had to see. But anyway, point is, he owed talent. Candido had told me that this is the way that he got Candido and Tammy, at least. I don't know what he probably had a specialized story for each guy that he had put money in some way or another. But the guys wanted to help so bad that he nominated or appointed Candido and Tammy to be in charge of travel and made them like office assistants with some kind of verbal title. And they were putting the wrestlers' plane tickets and travel on their personal credit cards so they'd be reimbursed later. And it ended up that they had bought, I don't know, I think they did buy a house that they really liked when they had the, WWF run and made the money, and a couple years later they're doing this, and they ended up having to fucking move out of the house because they couldn't pay, their credit went to shit because they couldn't pay for the plane tickets they charged for Paulie. We owed in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, when I closed down, all talent, collectively, every wrestler that I owed money to totaled a little bit less than $10,000. And I knew I could pay that off. And I did within, that was November, December, January, by February, when I had started in Connecticut, I had already sent checks and paid, all those guys off, because it was a number, I didn't know anybody more than $1,000 individually, so it was a variety of, I cleaned that up first. And our biggest bills, and by the way, I still owe Mustafa $100 from a year before that, which is, I've mentioned, because when the gangsters no-showed me, he didn't come to pick up his payoff for his last show he worked. Anyway, Paulie owed the production companies and the pay-per-view, the cable people, blah, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, Candido told me another story. He told me that for one of those pay-per-views, may have been the first one they did, but for one of the big ECW pay-per-views, that was back when they had the, they used to have the Barker Channel thing, remember? And they would show the 30-minute promotional video over and over and over. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, of course.
He was supposed to produce a promotional video for like On Demand or whoever was operating the pay-per-view, and he kept blowing the deadlines, and finally, I don't know whether this is something he told Chris. Candido wouldn't have made it up. I don't know why he would have made this up to tell Candido, Paulie, but Candido said that the pay-per-view company ended up fining ECW $50,000 because they wouldn't present the goddamn contractually obligated fucking Barker Channel preview video of the pay-per-view that they were supposed to be running. But even if that's a made-up story, what the fuck is going on in that office? I said, Chris, you can't mean it. He said, well, Paul was doing promos, and he was in the guy's basement, and whoever they used to do the promos and the editing in the basement, he was down there for 36 hours doing TV, and he wouldn't come up, and they fined him $50,000. I'm like, what the fuck is going on with these people? Whether they would get fined $50,000 or whether he'd let one of his boys think he just got fined $50,000 because he couldn't be bothered to send the deal in, whatever the fuck. The point is, on our production end, we dealt with one production company, the folks at Channel 3 down in Chattanooga, and Ron DeCiani, who was the head of that department, he later went on, moved to Chicago, worked on the Montel Williams show. But anyway, they had the master tapes of all the Smoky Mountain shows. And I told him, I said, I'm going up to Connecticut and be working in the office there. You've got the tapes as collateral. I owed them, I'm going to say, $20-something thousand. And I said, I will be paying that off because I'm working on a couple things. Don't do anything with those tapes. Because that's when, again, the financials of wrestling from 25 years ago, what we're talking about now is Howard Brody was earnestly trying to get us an international television deal to buy the TV tapes, which in the 90s, many international television companies in various countries around the world bought wrestling tapes from America. This is not a made-up thing. This was a big business. Howard Brody had Ring Warriors. They sold the New Japan tapes. He was partners with Hiro Matsuda. He sold them in Germany, and he sold the whole 9 yards. So it was, at that time, one of the ways that a wrestling promotion could get an income with very little expense was to get an international TV deal. And, I mean, the stories from the 80s especially, which is when it started, when everything blew up, the Savoldi tapes, somebody in Brazil would pay $500 a week, just send me a tape, whatever. You've seen those deals. So Howard was working on getting us an international several, trying very earnestly, and if that had happened, if we could have had a guaranteed income like that of $10,000 or $15,000 a month, talk about $2,500, $3,000 a week, whatever, I wouldn't have shut Smoky Mountain Wrestling down. Now that's catering money to a lot of people. But they don't understand there was a difference in a territory business, and what Paul was trying to do, which is he never had a territory and wasn't trying to make it a territory. He really wanted to have a national television promotion, which was, with what he had to work with and the financial backing he had, even at that time, a fucking slim hope at best. What we were trying to do was a territory where guys could come in and make good money and be in the wrestling business and hopefully either get experience if they were younger or have a place to go after they had, worked the big televisions with a name, but it was an easier schedule and a regional situation, completely different. So anyway, ended up with, by May, I think, Howard sold, God, what was it, 60 or 80 Smoky Mountain TV shows to Germany, and I think for like $150 a week, he sold all 200 of them to somebody to a cable place in Japan. What was that? I want to say Nakatomo Corporation, but I may be confusing the movie. But anyway, so with that money, he took his commission and wired me the rest, and I turned around and paid the production company and got the tapes back. And cleaned up another couple of bills and actually put some of that money back in my pocket, because I had six figures, right over, a little over six figures in it. And Ruben, as I said, had put up the rest of the money. Nobody else had lost anything. I think a few of the crew members on the last taping that we did freelance, crew people that lived in the Tri-Cities, Tennessee area, and the average cameraman, audio guy at that point is $200. I sent out a few checks to addresses I had, and a couple of them by that point had come back because people move around. I didn't put the FBI out after them because I wasn't getting any angry phone calls. So I can honestly say that the only money that Smoky Mountain Wrestling ended up owing, hopefully they're not listening now. Well, the statue, as people say, the statute of limitation. You see that statute of limitations is out front of every courthouse. The statute of limitations has run out. We owed a radio station in Knoxville, WIVK, the most expensive fucking goddamn commercials in radio history. It was a big country station in town, and their ratings dwarfed everything else, and it was like buying a car to get 60 seconds on fucking WIVK. The radio station, and a radio station in Johnson City, and possibly a few dollars to our old friends at Fox 43 that charged us like paid programming, even though we were their highest rated program every Sunday until Fox Network kicked in. And I think I might have owed them for 3 or 4 weeks at the end there, but it was less than 20 grand for all of those people who bent over backwards to take our money and give us also almost no help. So that's what we ended up owing. Nobody went to court. Nobody got fucking thrown out a window. And then in the every story ends with a happy ending. I got my money back when I sold the library to the network. Well, actually, before the network, to the WWE when they first started buying footage. And by the time I paid taxes on what they paid me, I ended up with my investment back. And I'll say one other thing before I open the floor up to questions. But you'd mentioned earlier, it was my decision to shut it down because I talked to Ruben, and here was the arrangement. He never agreed to put any set amount of money in this thing. He said, I will get it started, I will fund it, get it up and running, and his basic instruction to me at the start of the thing was, as long as I am spending less and you are making more, we will continue in that direction. a much more politely worded and verbose statement, much like Ole made to Jarrett that summer of '83. It's a shits now. It can't get any worse. As long as it gets better, keep doing it. And that's what happened. He obviously, we started in 1992. He paid the startup costs, obviously, to shoot the original TVs and to make the deals, get things on the air and get things running, and the initial equipment we need. And I still wish that we'd bought a brand new ring truck from the start, because we spent a lot of money in that area trying to save
Good
money.
night.
But then we didn't start running shows really full time until the summer of '92. So '92 was the start. '93 was much better because business started to pick up. People started to realize what was going on. With the Rock and Roll Express were back together. For a while there, I've mentioned this, we had more people buying tickets to see spot shows in little towns in Virginia, like Council, Virginia, and Hayside, and all those places. You'd have 1,000 people there to see the Rock and Roll Express, and wrestling's back on TV, and it was a big deal in the small towns at first, but it took Knoxville and Johnson City a while. But then in '93, we got them to start coming. '94 was the best year we had financially and at the gate, because everything was clicking, and the TVs had penetrated. We had sponsors now. People were starting to see what was going on, and we were doing, well, the '94 was the year Night of the Legends. So at that period of time in wrestling, we were the only promotion, I think it's fair to say, that was actually getting bigger instead of smaller. WCW from '92 to '94, their house shows ranged from bleak to embarrassing, right? It was brutal. At some points in our run, we drew more people in Knoxville than they were in the Omni in Atlanta. The WWF business was down. Remember, because of the steroid trials, and obviously there were outside factors. But from '92 through '94, WWF live event business, and I believe TV ratings, had declined. Memphis, the other end of the state, had been a territory, had been there for 50 years. I think that was the period of time, didn't they actually left the Mid-South Coliseum and went to another smaller building for a while there, on the fairgrounds in Memphis. And then Randy Hale's booking, and especially with the USWA and Smoky Mountain feud, he got them back. But at that time, Louisville had become their, one of their biggest towns, just because Memphis had fallen off. So, and I don't know what ECW was doing, because that was the years Todd Gordon had formed it, and then Eddie Gilbert, and then Paul E. got brought in by Eddie, and then all that stuff. But I know it was a little early for them, but they weren't really making any noise. So, to defend Rick Rubin's status and qualities as a businessman, it wasn't like he was just pouring money down a well because he was, enjoyed the product. There was growth year over year obviously we weren't doing pay-per-view like WCW or WWF and the merchandising, whatever, but in the metrics that you could compare, live event attendance, broadcast TV ratings, we were the only company going up. And it wasn't until '95, for a variety of reasons that we can discuss, talent changing, the whole business falling in a hole, the guys we had getting stale, the Rock and Roll Express were still there, but now it had been 2 years, 3 years. How do you replace the Rock and Roll Express? But what happens when they get used to the Rock and Roll Express? So '95 was the year that we went in the opposite direction. And we tried to cut costs and trim things down to where an extra $15,000 a month would have been the whole difference. But at that point, when Rick said, okay, you don't have to close, we don't have to close, because he still had infrastructure. Their company out in California paid for our insurance and a few other things. He said, you do what you want, as long as you can break even and make it work, we can do this indefinitely. But when the TV deal didn't come in, and it didn't look like we could break even, I didn't have the facility to put any more in it, and I wasn't going to owe people a bunch of money. And then Tracy Smothers even came, there's a woman in Eastern Kentucky, she'll give us $50,000. I'm like, great, then I'd owe some woman in Eastern Kentucky $50,000, because now Vince is losing money. That's the other thing. In 1995 was the famous fucking year that he ripped all the goddamn water coolers off the 4th floor at Titan Tower because they were losing millions of dollars. And if Vince is losing money, things were not looking fucking bright for everybody else, and I didn't want to get stuck in that spot.
You had a lot of guys doing that, though, because I remember Tracy talking to me on the phone about that, about the potential investor. He never told me the amount of money. He just told me that he had someone. But Buddy Landell, same thing. He told me, like, oh, I had someone who, you know, but again, no amount was ever given to me, and knowing how much things cost, I don't know how legitimate it was. I mean, Warner had a guy that was going to pay $40,000.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is, but Tracy and Buddy sure didn't know a lot of women with $50,000. I'll just say that. But no, it wasn't like, okay, yes, then in that case we can kick the can down the road. But, and of course, if I had been able to have a time machine or the precognition abilities of Nostradamus and known that the Monday Night Wars and the Attitude Era and wrestling was going to get hot in 18 months or 20 months or whatever it was, it still would have been a while to wait. But it may have been different, but right then, as you look, I think, wasn't there a period of time in there in the mid-90s, about that same time, where WCW had just pretty much suspended house shows entirely and was just doing TV tapings?
Yeah.
Vince McMahon is pulling the water coolers out of the office at Titan Tower, and I still remember when he was cussing, when I got there in 96, he was still cussing that spring with, yeah, last year I lost $6 million out of my ass. So, at that point in time, you're like, what the fuck? You know, this is not looking good to do this anymore. And so that's why I made that decision. But I felt the same way about Ruben's money as I do about the merchandise. I've made a deal, so I'm going to treat this like my own. Horner told a story. Somebody's shoot interview, they sent me a clip. And fucking Horner told a story. Well, I went over to his house one time. He went over to my house 2 or 3 times, unfortunately. And he had like $20,000 in cash sitting on his coffee table. I said, ain't you gonna go to the bank? He said, I will sometime. Good God. The only time we ever had $20,000 in cash in front of us was when we got his fucking friend at the bank in Morristown, old Buzzy. Buzz was the banker's name. To fucking get 20 grand for a TV angle, put it in a briefcase, come and show it on TV, and when he came in, nobody knew who was behind Smokey Mountain Wrestling, so all the fucking boys thought the banker from Morristown, Buzz, was the fucking money man, and were falling all over themselves to bring him a Coke and a chair and everything else. But that was the point, is we were never at a point where we had a lot of resource finances to pick from. We were from one month to the next, which is why I was always somewhat on edge. Go ahead.
A few questions. One, I'm sure you've heard it, so many people have said it throughout the years, that if you had just held on a little bit longer, 96 is when the wrestling boom started. And everyone got lifted up because of that. And I'm curious if you think that's true, if it would have affected you that way. Like I said earlier, WCW and WWF eventually were gobbling up every bit of talent they can get their hands on. Paul was promising guys money, whether or not he knew he wasn't going to be able to pay for it, who knows. But do you think it's as simple as there was a wrestling boom, Smoky Mountain Wrestling would have had a boom too, or would you have had issues still, especially considering you would have had to find talent to get in there that wasn't going to immediately get signed? Because you weren't signing guys to contracts.
Right.
By WCW. What do you think would have happened if you had held on for another 6 months, let's say another year? Would you have gotten swept up in the wrestling boom, or would it have not affected you as much as everyone else?
Well, both. In I mean, I remember when I was up in Connecticut, hearing reports of they were having outlaw shows in the old Eastern Kentucky Smoky Mountain area that were drawing 2,000 people with just hardly anybody on them because all of a sudden wrestling was hot and everybody was paying attention. So I'm like, well, fuck, Newman, right? Couldn't happen 3 years ago. That's like, but that was the same thing Jerry Lawler said. The first time that the WWF in the 90s, when Lawler was doing Raw, ran Evansville, Indiana, they went to Roberts Stadium, the big building in town, and sold out. Six-figure house, like 10,000 people, whereas Evansville in the Memphis territory at the Coliseum, the old place, had been a Wednesday night stop for 20 years, and a good crowd in Evansville in any day was 1,000 people. As there's 10,000 people and Lawler walks out on stage, they introduce him, getting ready to start Raw, and the people give him a standing ovation, and he's playing the music, and he's standing there, he's like, where were you motherfuckers when I ran this town every Wednesday night? So that's kind of the way I thought about that when I'd hear some things like the spot shows and etc. But we could have run mega events in Knoxville and Johnson City during the Attitude Era. And because we already had sold out the Knoxville Coliseum twice for our big summer shows, just bringing in a few WWF guys or a legend like Road Warrior Hawk or doing the Night of Love, whatever the case. That's one thing we were able to do is snag the people for the big events, the several events a year they had to see, the Bluegrass Brawl, whatever the case. But so if we'd had access to the WWF talent like we had in 94 and 95, in 98 and 99, well, you could have put some of those guys on the card and just automatically drawn a huge house because of their name and they're coming there in person. However, they weren't going to come run the territory or work the territory. You weren't going to have them on your spot shows. So it would have been feast and famine. It already kind of was. In that, in 1995, our spot shows, we ran 3 to 4 shows a week, but only Knoxville was only once a month. Johnson City was only once a month. We ran Barberville, Kentucky once a month. It did very well there, but it was still a smaller town. I lost the Heavenly Bodies in 94 to the WWF brought them up, but at the same point, they'd already been there for a year and a half, or 2 years at that point. So they were starting to get old. I don't say old chronologically, but you know what I'm saying. They're not new to the people anymore. They've been there weekly on television. The Rock and Roll Express that were so hot, they were still good, and how do you replace the rock and roll? But now they've been back together for 3 years on our weekly television. People are saying, well, why don't you replace them? Well, who was I going to replace those guys with? How do you replace the Rock and Roll Express? How do you replace the Heavenly Bodies? At that level of a territory, you need somebody. I wasn't looking for guys that the big companies really wanted to sign. I wanted the guys that could work old-style Southern wrestling. But those guys were aging out, which is why I loved getting guys like Candido and young guys that, Al Snow, young guys that could get experience there and learn from those guys while they were still around and still in the ring.
But there's a good example. I mean, you had Al Snow for what, 6 months, 7 months, and he got gobbled up.
Yeah, but
I mean, both companies were after him. WCW was trying to get him when WWF signed him.
Yeah, but see, here's what I was going to say was, if I had continued to be in operation in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, because of the political affiliations, it would have been an earlier version of developmental than what they actually ended up having, because Vince had already agreed to send me talent to battle WCW, so that's where the side would have gone. So the guys already were encouraged to sign with WWE, or WWF then, and it would have been more formal, and I would have had guys, point I was going to make is I would have had guys for the big shows, but you can't run the whole territory and make an entire roster a living on just the big shows a few times a month. So I was running out of guys that weren't stale or could replace the talent that I had already had gotten over the previous years. 95, whether the guys were going to go to WWF or not, you have to change the talent, and I was running out of options available. So I don't think our talent was as good in 95 overall top to bottom. I don't think my booking was as good because I was starting to get burned. Had things thrown at us when people would, Eddie Gilbert went to Puerto Rico, some other guys, Vince would take, some other guys he'd send me back. But to answer your overall question, yes, it would have benefited us in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the wrestling boom. But then the problem would have become when they busted, we might have very well have busted too. So it's a very interesting what if in that point. But yes, some of our shows would have benefited, and we could have had access to major talent to do big shows, but we couldn't have run a full-time territory. Even under those conditions, I don't think, unless we would have had a massive influx of a new investment to open up several more TV markets. Because as I mentioned...
That's what I was about to ask. That's what I was going to ask.
Okay, well, then go ahead and ask that.
If, let's just say hypothetically, like you just said, the big shows end up being bigger, maybe you could run them a little more frequently, maybe even the spot shows get picked up. Maybe you're able to double your audience in spot shows just because wrestling's hot, Smoky Mountain's getting more attention, Vince is helping you because you're running closer to WCW than anyone else. If you're all of a sudden making a little bit more money, do you immediately go and say, how do I get into Chattanooga? How do I get into different towns in North Carolina? I mean, do you immediately go towards expanding the territory?
Well, no, because here's the thing. We got too big to be small, but we were still too small to be big. And do we go, if we finally got to a point where we were making some money doing what we were doing, then do we say, okay, now we're going to fucking spend all that money to go try to do it next door in Charleston, Huntington, West Virginia, and over in Roanoke, and blah, 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 and start that process over again? As I said, without an influx of more legitimate investment, rather than just, okay, here's some more, we're making money on what we're doing now. Because Knoxville had been closed for 3 years, since 1989. So there had been no live wrestling on a television and major league scale. They'd had independent shows, obviously. I'm talking about a territory, TV, etc. We go in, they've been dark for 3 years. We get the TV on in February of 92. And in 2 years, actually it was February of 94, Sunday Bloody Sunday, we've gone from a brand new company they saw for the first time and starting to run monthly events to we drew over 3,000 people in the Knoxville Civic Coliseum. Because we built the town. We got the people excited about it. They got familiar with what we were doing. We went out and got sponsors. We advertised on the radio. The wrestlers were seen around town, whatever. Johnson City, Tennessee, same thing, in that they had had no territory wrestling since Continental Southeastern had closed up. They had some WCW TV tapings. Well, it was like Knoxville had, but it wasn't their wrestling. So we go in with a new program, and I think the first show in Johnson City at Freedom Hall, we drew 500-something or 600-something people. But then, by a couple of years later, we ran that big show in April, and we had like 12, 13, 1,400, whatever it was. Every time we could get television on in a market, what we did with Eastern Kentucky, even though we didn't actually... Hazard was where the TV station was, but that covered the Eastern Kentucky area. So we had Barberville, we had Harlan, and most importantly, Pikeville. And we go in there from scratch, and within... it didn't even take 2 years. Within the first 11 months we were on that television station, we go into Pikeville and we draw 2,000 people in Pikeville, Kentucky. Every time we got a TV market and got a consistent time slot and got a chance for the people to see the program every week, and we start running the town and the people start coming, they liked it and they came back and we were able to build the town. The problem was we didn't have any other major TV markets. We couldn't get into Charleston and Huntington, West Virginia. We tried like crazy. Two of the four biggest stations, actually the only four stations, I think, in Charleston, Huntington, are owned by Sinclair Broadcasting. And they put Ring of Honor on at the start. And we had, with Ring of Honor, I think it was somewhere 20-something or almost 30,000 homes watching the Ring of Honor shows between the two stations in Charleston and Huntington in 2011. And that was with the way that television is eroded. If we could have got a wrestling program that was local and coming there on 1993, that probably would have replaced Knoxville as our biggest live event market. But we couldn't get in there because they wanted at least $2,000 a week. We tried Lexington, Kentucky. I'd seen what that town could do, but we couldn't get in there because the TV stations didn't want wrestling unless they treated it like paid programming. The second, actually most important market that we tried to get into was Asheville, North Carolina, because of the way the TV was set up then, and still is for the broadcast stations. WLOS TV Channel 13 in Asheville, North Carolina, was also a huge station for Ring of Honor, because it was a Sinclair station. They were doing like a 3-something local rating, and the general manager loves wrestling there, blah, blah, blah. But that market, one of the broadcast stations is in Asheville, one of the broadcast stations is in Greenville, South Carolina, and one of the broadcast stations is over in fucking Spartanburg. So if you got TV on in that market, you could run all 3 of those towns as a live event off each TV station because they all crossed over. So we were desperate to get in there. And Sandy Scott beat him up. He worked with these people for years for Crockett. But they wouldn't, it was paid programming. So what we did in Knoxville, what we did in the Tri-Cities, if we could have got those 2 television markets and done the same thing, we would have had 2 more big, actually 4 more big live event markets: Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg, and 5, Charleston, Huntington. And they had wrestling histories. And in 1986, Greenville, South Carolina did over $600,000 in paid wrestling admissions at the Memorial Auditorium for like 42 shows. So, that's the thing is, we wanted to do in those markets what we did in Knoxville, but we could never break in and get the TV for any kind of affordable price to get started. If we paid $2,000 a week and run the TV for 4 months and then start running shows for 6 months before they start producing, then you're so far in a fucking hole. How long does it take to get out of it?
If there's a wrestling boom, is it unreasonable to think you could have found a new sponsor that would pay you, let's say, $1,000 a week, $500 a week, and that would cover some of the costs?
Well, here's another thing. That would not be unreasonable, and that would have been a lovely thing if we could have found somebody to go out and, because already it was a case of, we were like Crockett against Vince. We had look at our office infrastructure. Me and Sandy Scott, Horner's supposed to be doing something. Brian Hildebrand's doing 3 jobs, and there's Pam Lawson. She was the one who's supposed to go out and get the sponsors to pay for the TV. We had the highest rated program in the Tri-Cities on either Saturday morning or Sunday morning. We were aired on both days at one point or another. But we were the highest rated program in the market when we were on the air, except when we competed with Meet the Press. They were big with the over 70 and dead audience. We had the highest rated program in our time slot in Knoxville on the absolute weakest station in Knoxville. But after I finished booking this whole thing and performing as the heel manager and being the go-to guy with the post-production and working with the TV facility and fucking making sure that Rick Rubin's happy, I'll just spend a few days a week going out as the heel on the program that nobody knew was in charge of the company, and I'll sell sponsorships. No, that's why we tried to find people who couldn't find anybody that could sell them. I wanted, at one point, I wanted to move Howard Brody up to East Tennessee, but he wasn't fond of the idea. So yeah, you know, that's the thing. If we'd have had somebody that could go out and as people were starting to see that wrestling was becoming hot again, if we had somebody going out and selling it and pointing to the factual ratings and looking at, hey, these people put anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 people in the Civic Coliseum every month, and we can advertise your all that stuff that I was trying to motivate somebody in that situation to do, it would have been lovely. But I was hamstrung by having to be behind the curtain and also having to sleep at least 3 hours a night. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting but quarantined edition of the Jim Cornette Experience. Today, Stalkers, Stories, and SummerSlam Memories. We're going to have a SummerSlam 93 watch-along doubleheader. We'll talk about this week in NXT, the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller is our special guest, and so much more. And joining me, Hawaiian Brian, my podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard podcast.
Hi, big boy.
Hi, big boy. Mr. Co-host to you. He's live from the rolling pastures of New Jersey where the polo ponies roam free. Your friend and apparently mine, the great Brian Last.
Aloha, Jim. Roar! I guess maybe I should say. I've got a lot of lion talk on this week's episode.
There's going to be some lion talk later on with there will be no lying about, with our special guest Ron Fuller, who's written a book in addition to his other podcasting endeavors and all kinds of things. And it's hard to be in a bad mood today because I didn't watch any fucking All Friends Wrestling this week. So it's hard to be in a bad mood. We're going to have fun today. It's a lighthearted day. And now we're back, ladies and gentlemen. I have a great update. And that's why you should listen to the podcast instead of, listen to the clips on YouTube. Listen to the podcast in its entirety. You'll hear different programming in some cases. The National Pin update. The fine folks at National Pin got me all my pins, all my keychains. Folks, if you're going to JimCornette.com, or if you have in the last week, I guess now, ordered at JimCornette.com, and you ordered enough that I have to put it in a box. Right? Not the bubble mailer for just like a t-shirt or a single book or something. If I got to put it in a box, the DVD sets, multiple items, you're getting free pins, possibly a free keychain. I'm putting separate things in separate items. Some people, they ordered the Mid-Atlantic DVDs and the Straight Shooting series. They get a couple of pins and a fucking flashlight keychain. I'm going all the way with this. But amazingly enough, right after the show, what was it, 2 weeks ago or even less, where I had mentioned this story that I'd been sending the orders in and I wasn't hearing nothing and they had forsaken me. And I mentioned this within 12 hours after that show aired. I had my contact that the first of my 4 orders that I'd been placed over the last 3 months or so, maybe 4 months, was in transit, and all of them caught up. And a fine young lady named Holly sent me an email making sure that everything was okay and that I got 10% off the total of the combined invoices for the inconvenience of the orders being late. So I appreciated that. And of course, a few members of the cult were brusque with National Pin on Twitter because you, great Brian Last, stirrer of de poopy, they're on Twitter at National Pin. I didn't even ask you to do that. You just brought that up, and some people were brusque with National Pin. Well, now they can be nice to at National Pin. Stuff is here. Cornette's happy. Gave him a great deal.